So we're rounding out the last month that it'll take to complete 7 years with our journey as bakers owning Proof. I'm here on a 40-acre wheat field that's being grown exclusively for us. And I find that to be a bit surreal. This is Rouge Bordeaux. The wheat itself is just starting to turn. So it's changing from green, you can see some of these are still quite green, to golden. And you can see as the wheat turns, it starts to actually, the head starts to bend over a little, and eventually the seeds drop to the ground and plant new wheat. That's the whole idea. But as it turns, we will harvest this wheat. Rather, it'll be harvested by the local farmer that's growing it. It will then get cleaned by the company that we actually contracted with to buy it. So the step that will happen between the farmer and our mill will be the grain cleaning process. By the end of it, we'll just get the berries from the inside of these heads. And we'll be milling these to make bread and pastry for the next year. We hope that around 30% of all of the flour that we use as a bakery in the next year will come from this field. I think about kind of our journey with flour. Recently, we created an update video that showcases kind of the warehouse that we built over the last year at our Shea facility. A big part of that project was being able to mill our own grain. And well, here it is. The interesting thing about this is this is just the beginning for us. So we were able to plant as much acreage as we were willing to contract for. What it means is that whether things go well or not, we're committed to buying this grain. So long as the grain that comes from this field is within a certain set of specifications, our arrangement with the farmer is that we will buy all 40 acres. It's a crazy step versus anything that we've ever done before, where in the beginning we just were able to buy flour from a store. And then eventually we were able to buy flour from a local mill. But now we can choose the grain that we will mill ourselves into the flour that we wish to mill for our own use. And so in getting to this point, we're trying to understand more and more about the entire supply chain that starts with this grass. So on a philosophical level, it's amazing, first of all, to be in this field of grass and to recognize that these are just itty-bitty seeds, and to consider that these seeds were used in such a way as to feed human civilization is a remarkable feat in and of itself. And it's worth recognizing that human achievement. The fact that we can have a role to play in our local ecology is also profound. As a bakery, let's say that if we actually accomplish our goal of using 30% of our own flour over the next year, that means that in theory we could have planted triple this field, and that's not insignificant. It means that we have the choice of what kind of grain is in the ground. We have the choice in figuring out how it's going to be cultivated to get here. And thus we can actually impact the environment around us. It's important to note that when we're in the city, we don't always see our footprint. But in this context, you can see more tangibly the footprint of our actual bakery and the footprint of our community. So the question is, what do we really want to eat? And the source is this grass. It's this wheat. But not all wheat is created equal. And what we ought to be asking ourselves as a society is, well, if we are going to eat this grass, doesn't it matter how we grow it? Doesn't it matter where we grow it? Doesn't it matter how much energy is used to transport this grass from here to wherever it is that it's going to be consumed? Something else that's somewhat profound is that our bakery feeds the community surrounding this area. And I think actually there's a lot to be said on this. If you look just across the way, there's a relatively busy road, a warehouse that's popping up. In fact, this field that we're standing on is listed for sale right now for industrial development. What's sort of sobering is we are in this growing city, and the farmland just gets pushed further and further out to the fringes. So as we've gotten to know farmers over the last 7 years being in the food industry, we've heard those stories, and we realized that by pushing farmers to the fringes in trade for residential development or industrial development, we're actually disconnecting further and further from our food sources or pushing them out from where we live. As a local bakery, we can choose to invest into our local agriculture, and that's what we're doing here with this field. What's interesting is that wheat is a really nice rotational crop for farmers to grow when they're growing in kind of older school. You could call it organic, or you could call it no-till methods. Wheat becomes an important rotation to restore nutrients in the soil. And that's why farmers like the one who's growing this field for us want to plant wheat. Maybe it's no longer the cash crop that you would take from things like soybeans or corn, but it is necessary in order to grow a cash crop in the first place, because without it, the soil becomes depleted. So I find it also interesting that on this wheat field, we can consider that we can choose to grow wheat that's tall. Like a lot of this wheat is approaching my height, around 6 feet. And what's interesting is that oftentimes the taller or larger something is on the outside, you can also expect that the root systems are deeper and more complex. Well, root systems have a way of, there's a correlation between the size of a root system and the amount of nutrients that are being taken up from the soil. We tend to nowadays plant wheat that's really short, grown super close together, and as a result is wind resistant. Farmers don't want these heads to be falling on the ground before they're ready for harvest. And so it's easier to control a set of wheat that's very short. But as a result, perhaps there's a correlation between that wheat and nutrient deficiencies. Maybe there's some correlation with why we're bleaching and enriching and modifying our flour instead of just using grain that is naturally nutrient rich, contains all elements of the grain. There's a reason that whole grains have been at the basis of nutrition for millennia. As a baker, I wish to be figuring out how to make excellent products using the best and most nutritionally dense flour that I can. So I have a deep incentive to make a whole grain pastry taste good. I think it will be better for the community if we are reconnecting with the source of our food. And here we are, right in it, in this beautiful wheat field in the heart of our city, which will go to feed thousands of people over the next year with delicious bread. So I'm excited to be here and happy to sort of celebrate this moment and what it represents for us as a business. I guess you could say we've come a long way from that garage bakery that had all of this intention in mind, but didn't have the resources to really do it fully. A lot of times growth can be viewed as a double-edged sword, and it absolutely is. Companies that grow often have this strange phenomenon that takes them further away from their overall mission or their values. Things become cheaper and profits maybe go up over time, but growth can be done in a different way. You can invest in your company, you can be fiscally responsible. That's what we've tried to do. Rather than buying cheaper flour just because we can buy it at bigger scale and get a better overall margin, we're still working on our margins. We're still finding a way to extract more value from the things that we buy. We're doing things like positioning ourselves to buy a full truck of flour in order to reduce the overall price per pound from our regional mill. But additionally, we're contract farming to get a better price point on grain that we can mill ourselves. And in working the supply chain that way, we still end up better off financially, but we're investing in wheat that we're proud of, that furthers our mission overall as a bakery rather than taking us further away from it. And so I can confidently say that as a multi-location retail bakery today, we are far closer to the original mission of getting close to the source of our food than we ever were as a garage baker in 2017, where the best that we could afford was industrial flour bought from a store because we didn't have the community support to have more. In other words, we know we have the community around us that will buy this wheat from us this year, and we've established ourselves to be sustainable enough as a company to be able to afford to commit to 40 acres worth. This would be a gamble that I would have never made as a garage baker, because had it failed, it would have taken our whole company out. 30% of our output over this next year is already a substantial risk, but I'm thrilled to do it, and I hope that in future years we can double down. I would love to do nothing less than to commit to planting more than one varietal of wheat in future years, or deepening my relationships with farmers around the state. It's an interesting position to have in the community, to be able to negotiate on the community's behalf of how should this random field in this metropolis be used? Should it go to more concrete and construction, or should it go to feeding the community? Oftentimes, this use case is the one that gets pushed to the fringes, but the reality is that we have to eat, whether we like it or not. We can't sustain ourselves just purely on concrete, and an element of us has to remain connected to the nature that sort of feeds us. So I wish to stand for that, and I wish to further our investment in local agriculture. I wish to spend less dollars transporting wheat across great distances where I'm using more gas than the wheat itself that I'm milling. You know, this may be a desert, but other desert communities have been responsible for bread baskets of the world. I think about where the origin story of sourdough bread is, ancient Egypt, and how that also is a arid desert place. we do have rivers, and those rivers have an intricate canal system that was originally put together by the Native Americans that called this desert valley home. And those canal systems can relatively efficiently, with just a handful of irrigation sessions, create enough water for this field of wheat. So I think we ought to consider where our food comes from more, and I'm excited to have a little role to play with proof. I'm going to take in the rest of this wheat field now before we go back to the city and go back to using it to create good bread for our community.